All right, hello everybody. Welcome to CIOOS Atlantic Data Discovery and Contribution. It's the Canadian Integrated Ocean Observing System presentation as part of Coin Atlantic's webinar series, Coastal and Ocean Data Management Best Practices. My name is Shen. I am the project officer for Coin Atlantic and an engagement specialist for CIOOS Atlantic. And I'm also joined today by Alexi Baccardax Westcott, who is also an engagement specialist for CIOOS Atlantic, and Jeff Cullis, who is our technical director. Now, before we dive in today, we would just like to acknowledge that at CIOOS, we in the Atlantic region respect the Indigenous peoples on whose traditional territories CIOOS work is conducted in Newfoundland and Labrador, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. We strive for respectful relationships with all Indigenous peoples as we search for collective healing, true reconciliation, and honoring these beautiful lands and seas together. I am currently on the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. And now I would like to pass it to Alexi to introduce today's topics.
Hello, everyone. Just quick go through here of the table of contents, but first I just wanted to say again, I'm Alexi Baccardax Westcott, engagement specialist with CIOOS Atlantic, and I'm also executive director at Coin Atlantic. And I'm currently on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, which is known as Mi'kma'ki. So in today's session, we want to explain a little bit about what CIOOS is, what variables we support in the platform, how you can access data in CIOOS, and how you submit data. And that last piece about getting data in is probably one of the parts that we're going to talk the most about. And we hope between each section that we'll be able to have time to allow for some questions from participants. So you can put those in the chat. There's also a question and answer box that you could use. And if you prefer, you can put your hand up during the questions section and we could unmute you and allow you to ask the question. So now a little bit about CIOOS. I think we'll move to the next slide, Shen.
There we go.
So CIOOS is an online platform for sharing, discovering, and accessing ocean data in Canada. CIOOS works across the country and across sectors to unite the knowledge, expertise, and infrastructure of Canada's ocean observing community. There are three CIOOS regional associations that have been established, and so CIOOS Atlantic is one of those. The other two are SLGO and CIOOS Pacific. And data is integrated into CIOOS nationally, which will be visible regionally and nationally. So we go to the next slide. CIOOS Atlantic is a consortium of multi-stakeholder partners committed to the development of data management and dissemination approach for the Atlantic seaboard. So we have, you can see the map there, the green space is the area that of the ocean that CIOOS Atlantic covers. And we have, when we talk about our sort of operational partners, we have Ocean Frontier Institute, the Ocean Tracking Network, Coin Atlantic, Marine Institute, Memorial University, and Dalhousie University. We can move to the next slide, Jen. So we talk about the role of these regional associations. So Atlantic, for example, in addition to data access, outreach and engagement is very important at the regional level. We engage with academia, NGOs, private, public, and even citizen scientists. So we meet with regional data users and data contributors. We foster participation in CIOOS, and we have continuous communication within the larger CIOOS system. So all of the regional associations together work together for CIOOS overall, CIOOS nationally. And so more data equals a more robust information system. So all of the data, Shen, if you can move to the next slide, is coming in through the regional associations and then being sort of integrated nationally so that you can go to the national platform and search for data and find data from the regions, or if you know that what you're interested in would be in one of the regions, you can also look for data and have data access regionally. So that's the next section that Shen will be going through briefly to talk about how you get data out. I can move to the next slide, Shen. And this is just another slide explaining a little bit about how CIOOS works. So essentially we have our partners from different sectors. We have either web services or direct transfer of data into the CIOOS Regional Association database. And then from there, there's access to the data because it's all open data and also visualization tools. And then once we get some feedback from the people contributing data and the people accessing data, there's feedback back to the beginning of the loop to try and better what we're doing. So we're still in we're still fairly new, and we're still in that process of getting feedback and always making improvements. We could go to the next slide, Shen. So just talking a little bit about benefits of CIOOS. It's a single platform containing relevant and high quality ocean data from diverse sources. We have tools that enable discovery, access, and visualization of ocean data. Increased regional, national, and international recognition of community work. A network to facilitate knowledge exchange between data contributors and data users. We allow for increased transparency and opportunities for collaboration, reduced duplication of effort. CIOOS offers tools and infrastructure to assist in the management of ocean observing data, and it provides timely access to data that can drive economic innovation, sustainable development, and climate change adaptation. So next slide, just to get a bit of an understanding of what we're talking about when we say CIOOS data. So essentially we're looking at our essential ocean variables, which currently follow the GOOS essential ocean variables, which is the global ocean observing system variables. So we go to the next slide, Shen. So we have physical variables, so I'm not going to say each of them, but we can see them here on the screen. These are examples of physical variables. And then next slide, Shen. We have the biogeochemical variables. And then these two, the physical and the biogeochemical, are, I think, mostly what Jeff, for the most part, will be focusing on for his part when we're talking about getting data into CIOOS and the formats and some of the data management considerations for getting data in. And if you go to the next slide, we are also accepting biological variables, but the biological variables are being handled a little bit differently, so that we'll have a metadata part of the data in process for CIOOS will be to fill out a metadata record, but the data itself for biology will be coming in through OBIS, the Ocean Biogeographic Information System. So that is actually going to be our topic of our next webinar next Wednesday. So if you want to know more about OBIS, if your variables that you're interested in being made available through open access, being seen through CIOOS Atlantic and also being seen through OBIS, then the next webinar will probably be of interest to you. And then we have the next slide, Shen. We have some cross-disciplinary EOVs. So for example, for CIOOS Atlantic, under marine debris, we have a data set about microplastics. So we'll just pause there and ask if there's any questions. We don't have a lot of time for questions at this point in the webinar, but if there's any clarifications that someone might want to ask, now's the time. And if not, we will move along. So Shen, do you want to?
Anything come in? Yep, I'm good to move on. So thanks, Alexi. We will now move on to finding and downloading CIOOS data. And let me just switch my screen here. All right. Can everybody see that?
I can, yeah.
Perfect. Let's say, for example, I work for a big aquaculture organization and I want to learn about the conditions on the Nova Scotia coast to determine where I want to establish a new farming site, let's say. So how can I use CIOOS Atlantic to get the information I need? So to begin my search, I'm starting at the CIOOS Atlantic website, which is ciosatlantic.ca. where you can find both of the data access tools, which are the asset map and the data catalog right here on the homepage. And we're going to start with the asset map. And to get there, we just have to click Discover Data. And then this will open up. So this is the asset map. It's an interactive tool that shows all the data sets supported by CIOOS Atlantic across the maritime region. And then these numbered icons that you see here represent how many data sets are located in that given area. And then up at the top here, I can also filter by physical, biogeochemical, or biological essential ocean variables, which is what Alexi just went over. So since I am a big time aquaculture developer, I'm looking for all of the ocean variables that could influence the site. So let's say, for example, we're looking at temperature, surface height, salinity, for let's say, and then we can zoom in a little bit to get a better view of all the different data sets. And let's pick this one. So up here, you can see the two highlighted data sets by clicking on the numbered icon. And for this example, let's pick the CMAR Jordan Bay data set. So by clicking on this hyperlink, you can see the description open up, which basically just gives you a little bit more information about the data. And it also provides a link to the data set in the data catalog. So we click on the link that says CCAN, and that will open up this new page, which will take you to the data set page in our data catalog. So as you scroll down the page, you can see, again, the description of the data as well as all of the metadata collected. You can also download a citation for the data in any style that you want. And as you scroll down, it just gives you a little bit of additional information, like tags, for example, where the data was collected, and basically just more information that helps you determine whether the data set is relevant to what you're looking for. So to actually view the data set, you can scroll up, and then under data and resources, you can see the two different outputs for where the data is located. And for this example, we're going to use the ERDAP data set. And to get there, you just click the Explore drop-down menu and click the Go to Resource button. And this will open up the data set in ERDAP. So ERDAP is the Environmental Research Division's data access program. It is a data server that allows you to download data sets. So all of the variables that you can see listed here are all the types of observations that were collected and are available for this data set. And to help you get just what you need, you have the option to select or deselect any specific variable. And you also have the option here to add constraints on the data. So let's say, for example, for this, I am only interested in time, the location, so that would be latitude, longitude, temperature, and wave height, for example. So with each additional constraint that I add, I'm restricting the amount of data that will be returned by the search, which is helpful for larger data sets. And then in the last two columns here on the right, just list each of the maximum and minimum values that apply for each of the variables. So once I have my desired constraints, I just scroll down to the bottom of the page and where I can generate my own URL, which is particularly useful for real-time data that's constantly changing. So if I'm searching for this data again, I don't have to go through this whole process. And then I just have to choose the file type that I want. So there's this drop-down menu that has all of the different types of files that are available for this data set. For this example, we'll just use the HTML table, and then we can click the submit button, and that will show us all of the data that's relevant to my search criteria. So back at the table, another really interesting thing that ERDAP can do is visualize my data. So to do that, we can click on the Make Graph link at the top here, and this will take us to the Make a Graph page. So this page allows me to customize a graph based off the variables from the data set. And there are a number of different things that I can do here. Firstly, up at the top, I can choose my X and Y axis and whether or not I want my graph to have markers or lines or stickers. Using the latitude and longitude as a X and Y will produce a map. And then just like before, similar to the data access form, I can apply constraints on my variables here. As we scroll down the page, I can also change the graph on a more cosmetic level, such as choosing a dot or an X or a square for the marker type. I can change the size as well as the color here. I can, after you have your desired constraints and graph settings, you can always click on redraw the graph to make it appear for you. So since I'm trying to investigate ocean conditions for my aquaculture site, let's say I would like to visualize temperature and significant wave height over a period of 1 year, but I'm only interested in temperatures that are over 10 degrees and wave heights that are under 10 meters. So by clicking on redraw the graph, we can see that this map has shown up. If we want to change any of the settings, again, let's look at temperature and significant wave height. You can adapt this however you like to put whatever constraints on it to show whatever data that works for you or what you're looking for. Once you have your desired data, it looks like I have some good data here. Now, all I need to do is download it. So down at the bottom of the page, I simply have to select my desired file type, just like before, by clicking this drop-down menu. For graphs and figures, normally we would suggest using a PDF or a PNG. And then all you have to do is click on download the data or image, and then that will download it to your computer, and then you can save it to wherever file that you need. So the asset map is a great way of accessing the data, and it's a great way of visualizing the geographic area of where the data is coming from. But the data catalog, which we will go to next, is a much more streamlined way to discover data within CIOOS. So starting back at the homepage, just next to the asset map button, we can click on the Explore Full Data Catalog button to bring us to the CIOOS data catalog. So here is the landing page for the data catalog. And here users can search for keywords up at the top, or you can also search for essential ocean variables. Now, since I'm looking to build an aquaculture site in Nova Scotia, we can type in Nova Scotia into the search bar. And then here you can see all of the available data sets that are available for that region. Now on the left here, in this menu, you can see all the different ways to filter the data. You can filter by location by clicking the draw button and highlighting the area that you're interested in. You can also, again, search by essential ocean variable. You can search by the contributing organization. You can search by tag, or you can search by the format that the data will come in. So once you find your desired data set that you're looking for, again, here's the CMAR Jordan Bay data set. You can click on it, and then again, it brings you back to the same homepage for that data set in the CMAR data catalog, and it's just the exact same process of going through ERDAP again to download and visualize the data. So ERDAP typically uses tabular data, which means a lot of the observations are in a column. So it makes it look like a giant spreadsheet, which is a little bit daunting for some users. So CIOOS is currently working on a new way to visualize the data called Data Explorer. And basically, it is a way to make the process a little bit more user-friendly. So similar to the asset map, it's Data Explorer is an interactive map interface. So you're able to click and move around, but instead of just highlighting one data set at a time, Data Explorer has the ability to search and filter through multiple data sets at the time instead of just one. So if there are any questions about that process, I'm happy to answer them. But if not, we are going to switch gears into getting data into CIOOS.
All right, thank you, Shen. So getting data in, we're going to split this into two parts. So the first part, I'm just going to talk about the process in general, and then the metadata intake form. So that is a big part of getting data in. And then we're going to switch over to Jeff, who's going to talk about some of the data management and data considerations for the data, getting data in. So if we go to the next slide, Shen. So first point of contact is with engagement specialists. So you'd be, for CIOOS Atlantic, you'd be connecting with Shen or I, and you can use the info@ciosatlantic.ca email address. So you speak with us first, and then we start moving into building and defining metadata and integrating data. So at that point, we're probably going to be bringing in and talking to a data specialist. And once things have been brought in, there's a chance for review and iterations, and then we make the data public. And go to the next slide, Shen. So in the initial meeting, we might talk about the considerations you see here about the data sets, so size, location, format, completed data versus real time, and the data license, and then also the catalog entry. So we can help you understand more about the metadata intake form, and which is now pretty well streamlined, and I'll show you in a moment. But talking about, so their title, summary, EOVs, who the contacts are, geospatial extents, and the platform and instruments that you were using. We go to the next slide now, Shen. So the metadata entry tool, I'm going to switch over and share my screen in a minute. So we have a web-based tool for adding data sets to the regional metadata catalogs. It ensures that the required fields are completed and allows for some translations and added features for region selection and the bilingual piece. So essentially, when you go to the tool, you're going to see the three regions that we see on the screen here, and you would choose CIOOS Atlantic. So Shen, if you want to, I'll share my screen now.
I think.
So this is what it looks like once you start. It gives a bit of, you can see that there's tabs along the top here. So you need to move through each of these before you're able to submit at the end. So this starts with a bit of, I guess, some instruction. So it's good if you are, even if you listen to me now, but if you come to this for the first time, it is good to read this. So this is the first step in making your data discoverable through CIOOS. And the metadata record will allow the data to be searchable through the data catalog that Shen was just showing us. So we want to be able to get as much data as possible, but some things may not be relevant, but what we need for sure are the fields marked with a red asterisk are mandatory. So when you get to the end to the submit page, it'll list pieces there that you missed, haven't filled out there. Once you have filled in a title, you're able to save. And so then you're able to come back. You don't have to finish it all once. You're able to come back and it'll be saved as a draft. And every time that you go through another part of the form and you want to make sure it's saved, you just go down to the bottom here. You can see the black circle with the disk inside, and you're able to save. So if we go to the first tab is data identification. So I just put in some information here, but just one piece is, you can use this translate. So if you're not sure about what your title might be in French, that can help you decide a French version. The data set language, choose French or English. This is an important part here where you're able to put in your abstract to really describe the data set. And here's a list of the EOVs. So you choose which ones are relevant to your data set. And I just wanted to note here that these little squares with the arrow open up to give you a description of each. So if you're wondering, that gives you some more information. And then here we put in keywords. So you can click on the box and it shows you keywords, but you can also enter, if you don't see what's relevant to your project there, your data set there, then you put in your own and add them. And then it just has a few more questions at the bottom of this tab about when the data was first collected, when was it published, if it was revised. It allows you to put in a DOI if that's relevant, and it asks you to choose a license. So I don't have a lot of time to talk about licenses right now, but it gives this list, and it gives you those squares with the pop-outs again. So it'll open a window, another window, and describe each of these. One that's common is a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0, which means that you're allowing people to use the data. So it's an open access data once you've submitted it through CIOOS Atlantic, but people who use it need to attribute to where it came from. So to give you, to make sure that they say whose data was in the first place. And then if we go to the next, so just one thing to notice as at the bottom, there's no next screen. So you just need to come back up to the top to go to the next tab. So you can choose your spatial extent here. So this is just covering off where your data set is located. So you can use the tools here to do a polygon or a rectangle and draw an area, or you can, if you know what they are exactly, then you can put the either polygon coordinates or bounding box coordinates. And then it also asks you to choose either depth positive or height positive and the minimum and maximum to show where the water column the data set's located, where the measurements were taken. Then we have a contact. So we just want to make sure we have appropriate contact. The ones that are required are the metadata custodian, data owner, and distributor. So you could have one contact, like I put in myself in this example, for all three, but you could have different for each of those. And then there's also different roles here that might be relevant to your project that you could put in for context as well. And then when we get to the resources page, this lets you put in the data itself. So maybe you have a report, a PDF. So that's what I had put here was a report. But what will happen is that as you work through with the data specialist, they'll end up uploading the ERDAP data sets. So that's something that you wouldn't be doing here at this point, but you might have other like CSV files or other images that you'd like to have included that you could add at this point. And then the last is talking about the platform. So asking you to describe the platform and then describe the sensors on the platform, and really trying to get as much detail there as possible. And that's something, if there's any questions about that we can work through with the data specialist to try and get as much information as we can there. And then when you go to the submit screen, so you can save this all the way through without submitting, but once you press submit, then it'll go to the data specialist at CIOOS Atlantic, so they'll be able to review what you've submitted. And it doesn't mean that it's finalized, that it's going on the web at that point, but it means that we'll be able to see what you've been working on, and you know, potentially have a meeting to talk about anything that you think might be missing or pieces that we could help you with. So I'll stop sharing there.
I see there's a question from Danielle about the different roles, data custodian, distributor. So yeah, I guess the custodian, right? So for the metadata contact, that's sort of the front-facing individual, or usually like an info at the organization name can work well there for making sure that just the basic parts of the metadata record are complete. The distributor is usually like the originator of the resource online. So some organization that's making it available, say prior to CIOOS, there might be organizations like CIOOS or others that might, you know, create a URL for some of those things. So those would be the distributor, and then the owner is essentially who should be cited for creating the data set itself, collecting it, sort of the principal investigator. And we're working to bring in some more elements of that, like eventually co-authors and so on might work their way into the citation and that kind of thing. So we're still working on improving how how that's done. Right, so I guess, yeah, thanks Alexi and Shen. So I'm Jeff Cullis on the technical team at CIOOS Atlantic. I am also based in Mi'kma'ki on the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I'll be talking a bit about kind of the technical details of our data management internally and some of the ways that you can help us, I guess, to get your data into a standard format where it can be brought into our system more easily. So next slide. So a couple things I'll be talking about. Again, I'm not talking about biological data so much this time. It's more data that can be brought into ERDAP. How to make that FAIR. So the FAIR acronym, how we'll set up access to your raw data. We'll talk a bit more about the I in FAIR data interoperability. So that relates to the input data formats, as well as how we can standardize data to be interoperable. The climate and forecast conventions have been developed in the past, and those are important for how we approach interoperability, and it has a tool for checking compliance. And then we're looking at some examples of how we've transformed data in the past for some of our data providers, and then kind of a summary workflow overview of our integration process. And then basically, once your data is available in our catalog and on our ERDAP server, what are the things you can do with that? So, things like creating persistent identifiers, data archival, quality control, and some sort of automated programmatic ways to access your data and visualize that. So yeah, just to go over the FAIR principles. So it was great for Shen and Alexi to cover most of these already. So once it's in the catalog, you've seen how you can find it in our catalog using the asset map, how it's accessible through ERDAP for download once it's available. The reuse piece is essentially the elements in the metadata that allow people to, once they have the data, actually understand it and be able to work with it productively. But we haven't touched too much on the interoperability aspect so far, so I'll be going into more detail on that. So for raw data access, essentially, before we get started, we need public URL of the data set that you've got. So essentially in the original form that you've developed, ideally with some processing done already, that the data providers can give us. So, in the ideal case, that's something that you've got an organization that's already put that online somehow, and we can just pull that data down from the URL. If we recognize that not everyone can do that, so depending on the size of the data set and some other parameters, we might be able to host it on our own infrastructure. So essentially what we would do is just take the raw files that you've given us and put them in a web accessible folder so that there'll at least be a URL where people can find it. So once we've essentially got to that point where it's accessible publicly, we then have the harder work of making it interoperable. So the point of data interoperability is essentially to ensure that the data that you create is structured so that it can be sensibly combined and aggregated together with other data sets. So you can imagine this example, sort of counter example, I guess, where you have a bunch of scientists all working with seawater temperature, and they might all record it using different terms: ocean temp, temperature, water temperature, H2O temp. Their units could be different: Celsius, Kelvin, Fahrenheit, you name it, and with different spelling. So now you've got, say you want to try and combine this data together and build one product out of it. Well, now you've got to go through and use a standard name for every variable that you want to use. Check the units all make sense and convert between them. So obviously that's not a great situation. So we're talking more now, I guess, about ways of avoiding that kind of scenario. Next slide. So for the basics, I guess, the input data formats, Shen showed, I guess, the outputs from ERDAP, where you can download in a wide range of different variable types. But in terms of getting data in, it's a little more limited. There are quite a few options. There's a link at the bottom to the full list that ERDAP supports on the input side. But typically, people are going to be working with CSVs, tabular text files, open source formats where possible, JSON as well. More advanced would be a netcdf file, which is a binary file type that has some metadata in the header and then the rest of the data in a binary format. We recognize that a lot of people are working with Excel, so we can work with you to transform that into something we can work with. Obviously, exporting CSVs is easy from Excel. And I guess something that could be a little harder to work with is real-time data, where there's going to be some kind of public URL that's constantly updated with new data as it comes in. And then any transformations that we apply to real-time data will have to be completely automated from that point right through to getting it into the ERDAP. Next slide. Right, so once we've got the file accessible and the format is correct, so now we're starting to actually look at the data values. One of the first things is the date format to use. So we're standardizing on ISO 8601 dates. So that's just 4 digits for the year and separated by dashes, the month and the day. And so an example there of today's date in 8601. And then if you're working with times, then there's the full format spelled out, you know, the complete record there. So both those times are the same. With either the offset of the time zone or the Z to indicate UTC time. So it's important to always record the time zone where you collected the data, otherwise times are hard to understand. And ideally use UTC time. We're trying to standardize on that for everything in ERDAP, just so that you can actually compare them between data sets more easily. For latitude and longitude, we're standardizing on decimal degrees instead of degrees, minutes, seconds format. Next slide. Right, so just before I get into the variables and so on, we will just a little introduction, I guess, to climate and forecast conventions for those that aren't familiar. So these, you know, this is from the CF Convention's website. Basically, you know, really trying to figure out which quantities are comparable, how to set it up so that those can be compared and aggregated. And then a key thing in there, I've highlighted both these things for emphasis, is just using a standard name table to get those variable names. Next slide. So we've got, now we're looking at the variables themselves. You know, the basics of getting it into ERDAP, you know, it requires that there's one column for each unique variable. So, you know, we have seen cases where there's been like one instrument and then there's like a value or a variable column and then a value column. So we actually had to pivot millions of rows in that situation. So, so we're trying to make sure that we essentially have for each variable one column per variable exactly. So I think mostly that's the case, but we have seen counterexamples. And then for climate and forecast, if possible, if there's a standard name out there that the climate and forecast defines that you can use for your variable, then that's what we would like to standardize on. So there's a link there I can share if people are interested or afterwards about right, what exactly you're capturing with your measurement. So there's many out there. Actually, there's hundreds to choose from. I've thrown a few in here as examples: seawater temperature, salinity, eastward velocity. You know, there's very specific examples, so you can search. There's a search function within the standard names table to find the exact one that you're looking for. If you can't find anything that's reasonable for your variable, then you can actually create a custom variable name of your choice, and that can still be CF compliant. So we typically want to follow the standard kind of naming with underscores that they're using. And if you think it's something that others might be interested in, you can actually go on GitHub, create an issue to request a new CF variable name so that everyone can make use of that. And then the final consideration, I guess, is, you know, you might have some things in your data set around calibration coefficients, error parameters, that kind of thing. A lot of users probably won't be interested in that data. So you may want for the data that you actually get into CIOOS to remove a lot of that extraneous information before, you know, getting down to a data set that you really want to publish. Next slide. So for the units now, as they all have a standard name or a long name, they should have an applicable unit as well. So here's an example. We've got a standard name, seawater pressure, with the unit decibars in parentheses. So that unit actually has to specify, must apply to all values in that column. So, we have seen cases where units might change. It's better if you separate those out to a separate column in that case. The standard names also require some canonical units. So seawater temperature actually says that the canonical units are in Kelvin, but I don't imagine many people are recording in Kelvin. But in practice, as long as it's convertible into Kelvin, so for instance, Celsius can be converted, then you can use whatever unit that you like. In the back end, there's the UD unit software that actually does the conversions and the definitions of the units and so on. So CF is kind of leveraging some of that software for what's going on there. Couple more details about climate and forecast. There's quite a range of specifications. There's links if people are interested for going into more detail and everything that's required. There's many attributes, dimensions, things like that for variables that I didn't cover, discrete sampling geometries and things like that. So there's quite a bit of detail if you want to dig into it, but I think the essentials are just the variable names and units, and we can work through more sophisticated examples if needed with you. And that there's the compliance checker tool. So basically, once you've generated something in ERDAP or a netcdf file up to these standards, then there's tools out there for just making sure that they meet all the criteria, and we'll give you a little error report if there are issues, warnings, errors that come up. And within Atlantic, there's CF 1.9 now. We're just starting with the 1.6 level, which is has a fewer requirements, and trying to ensure that all the data sets that we get into our ERDAP are kind of up to that standard. It's a standard that's been developed more so in the US by CIOOS, but it seems to be gaining quite a bit of international reach. So EMODnet Physics in Europe, they're using CF 1.6 as well for their ERDAP. So it seems like a good one to standardize on. So just a quick example, just kind of wrapping up some of the things I just was talking through there. So you can imagine someone comes to us with a data set with column headings like the following. So you've got the platform, the date it was collected, the time, notice no time zone. They were using ISO luckily for the date and time. And then the latitude and longitude are in degrees, minutes, seconds format. Then they've got temp for the temperature and some calibration coefficients in there. So you can just see that we would essentially transform this pretty simply to, well, for one thing, I guess we're just using lowercase and underscore naming, and then we're converting the date into the ISO with the time as well, and with the time zone. That Z at the end denotes that it's UTC time. Latitude and longitude are now converted to decimal degrees. Seawater temperature, so temp was turned into seawater temperature, which with a specified variable type, and same for the pressure in decibars. And then we actually remove that calibration coefficient entirely. So, that's not something that most users should be looking for. So just kind of simplifying the data set that way. Next slide. So yeah, I guess to also make this a bit more concrete, so recently been working with the Marine Ecology Lab on getting some intertidal temperature in from that they've collected. So this is in St. Francis Xavier. They've collected the data in some intertidal zones in coastal Nova Scotia. So they basically took the data that they originally collected for a publication and actually published it using Figshare. So that's got the DOI and so on automatically. And so we use that URL to pull the data down. And then they went through and created a metadata entry form record for us, which we harvested into our catalog. And then we had to convert the data itself. So, this took the Excel, converting to CSV, renaming the columns to meet the CF standards. We converted the times into ISO 8601 format in UTC time. And we also ran the compliance checker to make sure that it was meeting CF compliance. And then there's a link there, but yeah, so there's the final catalog entry ERDAP resource link that were created after doing all those transformations. That was the final product. Next slide. Right, and then for the I guess the Fundy Ocean Research Center for Energy. So FORCE, they came to us with some acoustic Doppler current profiler data. So essentially finding information about currents and waves and so on. Their initial data set was in NetCDF format. However, it had a lot of extra variables. So we wound up collecting a lot of these that had to do with Fourier coefficients, battery voltage and so on, down to, you can see on the right here, what's in our ERDAP. There's just, 3 different variables: pressure, maximum wave period, and maximum wave height, significant height. So really just working with the data provider to get down to the core of what most users might want to actually analyze coming from that data set. Yeah, and I guess sort of tying together some of the things I discussed earlier. So we've got our data provider coming in on the left with metadata and some data files on their own internal storage. Essentially, the variable names from those files will become the EOVs that go into the metadata entry form along with the rest of their metadata. That'll generate the XML file that we then use to harvest into our data catalog. And from there, it goes to the national catalog and the asset map. And then for the data set files they've given us, if they can make it, a URL for that data, we'll work with that. Otherwise, hosting in our own internal web accessible folder is the first step. Then sort of, we've got the original data with its column headers and values. We convert that into a standardized format, which uses the CF variable names and units. And then data from the entry form, as well as the data set itself, gets fed into the CIOOS Atlantic ERDAP. So you can see some of the metadata coming in from the metadata form, and then the data itself being standardized as well. And from there, once we have that ERDAP link, we go back to the catalog record and add a resource link into ERDAP so that it can be found through the catalog. And then we essentially run some compliance checks. We might have to modify the standard files a little bit to get it up to compliance. And then we're starting to look at data QC a little bit more. We are relying usually on our providers for most of the QC so far, but that is kind of one of the next things we're looking at. And then once all that stuff is available through the catalog and on our ERDAP server, we can look at things like minting DOIs, visualizing the data, getting API access to the data, and long-term data archival. Next slide. So in terms of those next steps, Shen mentioned the Data Explorer. So once it's in ERDAP, all that data can be viewed and downloaded and combined with other data sets using the more, I guess, the nicer user interface of the Data Explorer. We can start to look at adding persistent identifiers for the data sets that have been uploaded. So we can now mint DOIs using DataSite Canada Consortium membership. So that's a service we can now provide. And we can look at things like the Canadian Federated Research Data Repository, which has been spun up to, their mandate is to get all Canadian research data onto their system. And that will allow static files that are archived there to be available for at least 10 years. So that's kind of a nice service where we can pull out a standardized file from our ERDAP and then make that available long-term. And then there's ways of, going beyond, I guess, the typical way of getting data out. You can, if you're a programmer, you can use API access. Python libraries like ERDAPI and the CCAN API can help you pull out all that information into something that you can basically reprocess as needed. So say you put some data in, you've got an analysis pipeline in Jupyter Notebook that goes through a whole bunch of analysis steps on that data. Now later on, you upload more data to CIOOS Atlantic. Well, you can just rerun your queries, maybe have to modify them slightly and regenerate that report. So there's some good examples if people are interested for some of that work online. So yeah, happy to talk more about that if needed. I think that was everything I wanted to cover, but yeah, if there's any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Jeff. That was great. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions yet, but we can wait a minute to see if anyone has questions for you on that or anything else that we talked about. And then Shen's just going to do a conclusion in a minute here. If you'd like to speak, you can put up your hand and we can unmute you if you didn't want to put a question in the chat. Okay, so it doesn't look like we're getting any questions right now, so we'll get Chen to wait a second. I see something in Q&A. Okay, so there's a question from Bruce Hatcher on how are you handling data licenses? So Jeff, do you want to talk about that a little bit? I mentioned it in the metadata intake form that you choose the license that you wish to use, and there's yes. a list of licenses there.
Yeah, so yeah, as Alexi had showed there, yeah, there was that drop-down box with many different licenses to choose from. They're all, you know, requiring that the data be made open, obviously. We are looking at sort of non-commercial licenses. Some people are interested in potentially making their data available for non-commercial use, that kind of thing. As mentioned, yeah, we're focusing on the by attribution. So we, you know, the data's open to all as long as they attribute the people that created that data set. That's the main requirement. You know, we don't have an effective way of policing that stuff. We you know, keep track of all that in our metadata. You know, it is you know, we're relying on the community, I guess, to adhere to those licenses. And you know, if we are made aware of any cases where that's not happening, we can let the data provider know about what's going on and take the data set down if needed. But I don't think we're in a position where we can be out there trying to figure out everyone who's using the data exactly what they're using it for. So that's goes beyond, I guess, our current capabilities.
Yeah, and Bruce just did a follow-up question, but you already answered it. So yes, if a license is violated, how is it enforced? But I think you touched on that. Great. Just give a couple of seconds here in case anyone else wants to ask a question, then we'll close.
Oh, there was a question about, okay, there was already response.
Bruce just asked another one. He said, how many clients do you have now?
How many clients? I mean, you saw we had about 55 data sets, so they're coming from sometimes many of the same organization. There is the CCAN catalog organization page to help answer that. So there's 14 different organizations we've currently got data from. Yeah, so many of the ones we already discussed: CMAR, Force, SaneFX, DFO, Smart Atlantic, Ecology Action Center, Coastal Action, to name a few of them.
And then there's also that's CIOOS Atlantic. So then we have, if you were to search through the national platform, then you'd be able to access the SLGO and CIOOS specific. And Shen, I think it was around 1,700 data set for nationally.
1,700 data sets and 77 partner organizations nationwide. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do have, Bruce asked about DFO. So we do have some data from DFO, but that's an ongoing, you know, project and work to get more DFO data into CIOOS.
Yeah, and Atlantic were one of the newer ones, newer regional associations. So in most of the other regions, there are some larger organizations that predate the whole CIOOS project that, you know, have hundreds of data sets in their collections that they're making available. So we're starting more from scratch. We had Smart Atlantic, luckily, for a lot of the initial data sets. But yeah, we're aiming to build those holdings up quickly if we can.
Okay, Shen, if you want to
Sure
move to the
thing.
next slide there.
Yeah, thanks, Alexi. Thanks, Jeff. And thank you, everybody, for attending the CIOOS Atlantic Data Discovery and Contribution, which is the first webinar in Coin Atlantic's webinar series, Coastal and Ocean Data Management Best Practices. For more information, or if you have any other questions, you can follow up with any of the CIOOS Atlantic contact avenues that you see listed here. And then we would also like to take this opportunity to shamelessly self-plug the other two webinars in this series. The next one is coming up on March 16th, which with the Ocean Biographic Information System, or OBIS. And the third is with the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, happening on March 23rd from 1 to 2. So you can find the registration links for these two webinars on the Coin Atlantic Twitter, which is @Coin Atlantic, on our Facebook, which is also Coin Atlantic, and on our website, coinatlantic.ca, under the events tab.
Yeah, and I just put in the link as well in the chat if you want to click that right now, if you wanted to go there and get the links for the registration. And there was a question earlier about whether or not we'd have the recordings available. So we do plan to send an email once the recording is made available online with the link to rewatch the recording. So I guess thank you, Shen and Jeff, and thank you everyone for attending. And I guess we're finished now, and hope to see you again at one or both of the next webinars happening in the next 2 weeks.